The amendment passed on a Wednesday, and what it meant in plain language was that no human vessel, human diplomat, or human institution would ever again be legally permitted to make first contact with a newly discovered species. That right, and all the economic and political privileges that came with it, belonged permanently to the Council's 5 founding members. And humanity, which had been discovering civilizations at twice the rate of any other species for 30 years, was to be reduced immediately and permanently to a forwarding service. My name is Dr. Yusuf Adeyemi. I am 71 years old. I spent 14 years as a deep-range exploration navigator with the United Earth Cartography Corps, 9 years as the director of Earth's First Contact Protocols Division, and the last 11 years as Earth's senior representative to the Galactic Council's Interspecies Integration Committee, a body whose function, in the years before everything changed, was to oversee the formal introduction of newly discovered civilizations into the Council's membership framework. I had sat on that committee long enough to understand its real purpose, which was not integration, it was gatekeeping. The founding 5 species controlled who entered the Council, on what terms, and with what obligations. Every new civilization that came through that door came through indebted, grateful, and carefully positioned to never threaten the arrangement that had placed the founding 5 at the top of everything. I had been filing objections to that arrangement for 11 years. On the Wednesday the amendment passed, I was seated in the observer gallery of the Grand Conclave Chamber on Theta Prime Station, holding a stylus I had been clicking rhythmically for 3 hours without noticing, watching the vote tally climb toward ratification on the chamber's main display screen. The Vethrani bloc voted as 1. The Shen Collective voted as 1. The Arathi Conclave, the Lirosi Federation, and the Dorvathi Reach, the other 3 of the founding 5, voted as 1. Between them, they commanded 287 votes, enough for ratification without requiring a single junior member to break ranks. The junior members voted in the direction they always voted when the founding 5 presented a united front, which was the direction of self-preservation. Final tally, 367 to 45. The 45 votes against came from 11 junior member species, 3 minor collective bodies, and Earth. I clicked my stylus once more and set it down on the gallery railing. On the chamber floor below, the Vethrani-led delegate, a senior administrator named Velthrix, whose title translated roughly as the voice that sets the terms, was receiving congratulations from his counterparts in the other founding species delegations. His secondary feeding tendrils, which the Vethrani extended in moments of genuine satisfaction, were fully visible above his formal robe collar. He had been trying to pass some version of this amendment for 6 years. Today it had finally moved through the chamber cleanly, efficiently, with none of the procedural delays that Earth's legal team had managed to introduce in 3 previous sessions. We had run out of procedural delays. I watched Velthrix accept the congratulations of the Shen Collective's shared body representative, and I thought about a woman named Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran, who had died 4 years ago in a research vessel 340 light-years from Earth, in a star system that did not appear on any council chart, in the company of a civilization that had never heard the name of the Galactic Council and had therefore had no reason to fear it. I thought about the 34 civilizations she had introduced to that same freedom. I thought about the compact she had built to protect it. Then I stood up from the observer gallery, collected my data case, and walked out of the Grand Conclave Chamber for the last time. The corridor outside was cold and long, and lit in the soft blue tones that the Council's designers had selected because they were calming to the largest number of member species. They had never calmed me. I had spent 11 years walking them, and they felt, on the day I walked them for the last time, exactly as they had always felt: institutional, deliberate, and very slightly designed to make you feel small. Osavith found me near the junction to the docking bays. Osavith was Lethrani, a junior administrative clerk who had worked in the Interspecies Integration Committee's filing division for 9 years and who had, somewhere in the middle of those 9 years, developed the specific quality of conscience that makes a bureaucrat dangerous to the system they serve. I had known Osavith for 6 of those years. We had never discussed anything that would have been inappropriate to discuss in a public corridor. We never needed to. Osivith had a gift for timing that I had come to rely on without ever making explicit. The clerk fell into step beside me and said nothing for approximately 30 meters. Then Osivith said, very quietly, "The ratification takes effect in 14 days. "I know," I said. "After that, any human vessel that initiates contact with an unregistered species in Council-adjacent space will be in violation of the amendment. The penalties are classified as acts of interspecies aggression." "I know," I said. Osivith was quiet for another 10 meters. Then, "It's a very clean piece of legislation." "It is," I agreed. "Someone put a great deal of thought into closing the procedural gaps." "They did." Another pause. Then, "I imagine it would be very difficult to violate it from outside Council-adjacent space." I looked at Osivith for just a moment. The clerk's color panels, the bioluminescent strips along the Lethrani jawline that served as an emotional register, were set to a neutral gray that communicated nothing to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. To someone who was paying close attention, neutral gray on a Lethrani in a moment of obvious emotional significance meant something specific. It meant, "I am saying something I cannot say, to someone I trust to hear it." Very difficult indeed. I said. Osivith peeled away into a side corridor 30 meters before the docking bay access. I did not look back. My shuttle was in Bay 7. It took me 6 minutes to reach it. I sat in the pilot seat and did not engage the engines for a long time. Outside the viewport, Theta Prime Station's orbital position gave me a clear view of the system's primary star, a yellow dwarf, warm and steady, indifferent to everything that had just happened in the chamber behind me. I opened my secured communicator. The channel connected on the first pulse. The voice on the other end belonged to Director Amaka Ose, the current head of Project Vanguard, the most classified program in the history of human space exploration. She had a voice like deep water, calm on the surface and full of things moving underneath. "It passed," I said. "We know," she said. "We were watching the feed. 14 days to ratification." "Yes." I looked at the star outside my viewport. "How many of the 34 have confirmed?" 32 as of this morning," she said. "The Thurvani Collective is still deliberating. The Osean homeworld confirmed 2 hours ago. And the compact itself?" There was a pause that was not uncertainty. It was the pause of someone choosing how to say something they had been waiting to say for a long time. "Yusuf," Amaka said, "the compact has been ratified by 32 independent civilizations, representing combined populations of approximately 4.1 trillion sentient beings. It predates the Council's amendment by 9 years. It is legally registered under the exploratory treaty frameworks of 11 different member species' own foundational law, and not one of those 32 civilizations has ever had a formal relationship with the Galactic Council." I let that sit for a moment. "They're going to say it's not legitimate," I said. "They're going to try," she said. "Our legal team has been preparing for that argument for 4 years. How long do we have before we need to move?" "We move on day 15, she said, "one day after the amendment takes effect." I engaged the shuttle's engines. The bay doors opened ahead of me, and the stars came through clear and sharp, and full of things the Galactic Council had never thought to look for. "Come home, Yusuf," Amaka said. I set the course. "I want to tell you about Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran, because nothing that came after is comprehensible without her, and because she deserves a complete accounting." Priya was born in Chennai in 2038, the daughter of an astrophysicist father and a linguist mother, and she spent the first 20 years of her career doing something that the Galactic Council's science observers, who monitored human research the way a large predator monitors small animals near a waterhole, had categorized as xenolinguistic theory, non-applied, low strategic relevance. She was developing a mathematical framework for first contact communication, not a translation system, not a signal protocol. A framework, a set of foundational principles for how two species that share no common language, no common reference, and no common evolutionary history might nonetheless find the conceptual territory they actually do share and begin to build from there. The Council's observers categorized it as academic. The Council's observers had been making first contact with new species for 300 years using a method that Priya described in her first published paper on the subject as structurally coercive, which was a careful academic way of saying that the Council showed up in a new civilization's sky with technology so superior that the new species' choice between cooperation and non-cooperation was not meaningfully a choice at all. Priya's framework was different. It was built on the premise that genuine first contact, the kind that produced genuine partnership rather than managed dependency, required that the species being contacted understand from the very first exchange that they retained the right to refuse. Not the nominal right, the actual right. The right that could only exist if the species making contact arrived in a way that made refusal genuinely possible, which meant arriving, if at all possible, in a way that did not make your technological superiority the first thing the other species encountered about you. She spent 6 years developing the framework. She published it. The Council's observers filed it under non-applied xenolinguistics and moved on. Earth's Deep Exploration Program, which had been quietly expanding its operational range for reasons that the Council's observers also considered non-strategic, put a research team on it within 3 months. 8 years later, Priya was leading that team in person aboard the exploration vessel Threshold, 200 light-years beyond the outer boundary of Council-charted space. I should be precise about what beyond the outer boundary of Council-charted space meant in practice, because the Council's charts were not a map of the galaxy. They were a map of the Council's interests, the systems that mattered to the founding 5 species and the corridors between them. The galaxy is approximately 100,000 light-years in diameter. The Council's charts, at the time Priya's team began their work, covered an area that Priya herself calculated as representing roughly 0.3% of the galaxy's inhabited volume, based on the statistical distribution of stellar types capable of supporting complex life. She was not guessing about the 0.3%. She had done the math. She had presented the math to the Interspecies Integration Committee 3 years before I joined it, in a paper that the committee's presiding officer had thanked her for and filed without action. The paper's conclusion was simple. The Council did not control galactic space. It controlled a small, dense, heavily administered pocket of it, and the assumption that nothing significant lay beyond that pocket was not a conclusion based on evidence. It was a conclusion based on the founding 5 species having never seriously looked. Priya looked. The Threshold made its first contact with a pre-spaceflight civilization called the Thurvani in 2079. The Thurvani were an amphibious species living on a water-heavy world 212 light-years outside Council space. They had radio astronomy. They had been listening to their sky for 60 years. When the Threshold arrived in their outer system, Priya spent 22 days at distance, transmitting mathematical sequences and then listening to the responses, before she brought the ship close enough to be visually observed. When she did, she transmitted simultaneously in the Thurvani's own radio frequency bands, not to communicate content, but to demonstrate that humanity had been listening long enough to learn the shape of their signals before presuming to introduce itself. The Thurvani's first formal response, rendered by Priya's team's linguistic AI after 4 days of analysis, was, "You waited. Most things that come from the sky do not wait." Priya spent 11 months with the Thurvani. By the end of those 11 months, she had a complete working communication framework, a preliminary cultural exchange library, and something the Council's first contact protocols had never once produced in 300 years of operation, a formal written agreement between Earth and the Thurvani that both species had negotiated as equals, that included a clause explicitly stating the Thurvani's right to terminate the relationship at any time for any reason, and that had been ratified by the Thurvani's own governing assembly after a public debate that lasted 6 weeks. She transmitted a full report to Earth's Exploration Directorate when she left the Thurvani system. The report was classified immediately and routed to Project Vanguard's coordination hub, the facility beneath the Atacama Desert that had been the operational center of Earth's classified exploration program for 19 years. Priya did not go home after the Thurvani. She went to the next system on her chart. Over the following 21 years, the Threshold and the 7 vessels that eventually joined its exploration program made contact with 33 additional civilizations. Each contact followed Priya's framework. Each contact produced a formal bilateral agreement. Each agreement included the termination clause, and each agreement also included, once Project Vanguard's legal team had drafted the relevant language in year 4 of the program, An optional accession provision, a clause by which the contacted civilization could, if it chose, join a broader mutual framework with the other civilizations that Earth had contacted through the same program. Priya called the broader framework the Compact of Open Skies. By the time the Galactic Council's amendment passed on that Wednesday, 32 civilizations had acceded to the Compact. Their combined populations represented 4.1 trillion sentient beings. Their combined territorial extent covered a volume of space approximately 11 times the size of the Council's charted area, and not one of them had ever formally encountered the Galactic Council, which meant not one of them had ever been told that the Galactic Council had the right to determine the terms of their relationships with other civilizations. They had made their own terms. They had done it with humanity, and the terms they had made were registered, documented, legally verified under 11 different species foundational law, and 9 years old. The Council's amendment had arrived, legally speaking, approximately 9 years too late. Project Vanguard's operational structure was, in the specific way of all things that humanity built in this era, simultaneously remarkable and completely unglamorous in its day-to-day reality. It did not have a dramatic headquarters. It had the Atacama facility, which was deep and functional, and full of people doing specific pieces of work who were not permitted to discuss their work with anyone outside their clearance tier, and who had, over the years, developed the specific social texture of people who have found meaning in something they cannot explain to anyone they love. I was introduced to the facility by Director Amaka Osi in the year before I walked into the Interspecies Integration Committee for the first time. Amaka had been directing the program for 7 years at that point, inheriting it from the man who had built Project Vanguard's operational framework and who had retired to a farm in Oaxaca and was, by all accounts, extremely content never to attend another classified briefing. Amaka was 44 years old when I met her, which felt young for someone carrying what she was carrying, until I understood that the thing she was carrying was not a burden. She was a person who had found the exact work she was supposed to do, and had organized her life around doing it as well as possible. She had Priya's framework memorized. She had the Compact's legal documentation memorized. She had the exploration reports from all 34 contacts memorized in the specific way that you memorize something, not because you've studied it, but because you've lived with it, until it became part of how you thought. She showed me Project Vanguard's 3 operational pillars on my first full day in the Atacama facility. And I want to describe them carefully because the world spent a long time not knowing what 41 years of classified human exploration actually looked like in practice. The first pillar was the exploration fleet. Not a military fleet, an exploration fleet. 23 vessels, all of them designed for extended independent operation in deep space. All of them fitted with the most sophisticated sensor arrays that Earth's Classified Research Division had been able to develop over 30 years. And all of them equipped with what Priya's team had developed as the Contact Suite, a standardized package of communication tools, cultural exchange protocols, and linguistic AI systems built on her original framework and refined through 34 actual contact events. The vessels were not hidden in the way that military assets are hidden. They were simply operating in space that the Council had never bothered to chart, which meant they were as invisible as anything can be in a universe where their location is simply not on anyone's map. The fleet's technical specifications were not superior to the Council's best exploration vessels. They were not designed to be. They were designed to be exactly what they were, the best tools a species could build for the specific purpose of making genuine contact with other intelligent life in a way that left that life better off for having been contacted. The second pillar was the legal architecture. This was the work that Priya had always considered secondary to the exploration itself, and that her legal team had come to consider equally essential. Over 30 years, 600 legal scholars, treaty specialists, and diplomatic historians working in isolated teams had been building and verifying the Compact's legal framework, ensuring that it could withstand challenge not just under Council law, but under the foundational legal principles of each contacted civilization's own governance system. The Compact was not, legally speaking, a Council document. It predated the Council's amendment. It was registered under treaty frameworks that the Council's own founding members had ratified and could not unilaterally revoke, and it had been submitted for independent legal review to scholars from 17 different species, none of whom were human, none of whom knew the full scope of what they were reviewing, and all of whom had confirmed its legitimacy under the legal frameworks they were asked to evaluate. The compact was not a challenge to the Council. It was a fact that existed outside the Council's jurisdiction, built from materials the Council itself had provided, in a space the Council had never thought to occupy. The third pillar was what Project Vanguard called the Witness Archive. Priya had insisted on it from the program's first year, and it was, in my view, the most important thing the program produced. For every contact event, every first exchange, every negotiation, every formal agreement, the exploration team had maintained a complete record. Audio, visual, linguistic, cultural, everything. The records were stored in triplicate in 3 separate facilities on 3 separate worlds. They documented in exhaustive and unimpeachable detail that every civilization in the compact had entered their agreement with full information, full choice, and full understanding of what they were agreeing to. No coercion, no technological intimidation, no fine print. The archive was the proof that the compact was what humanity said it was. Priya had died 4 years before the amendment passed, in the Threshold's medical bay, of a cardiac condition that she had been managing for 6 years, and that she had declined to allow to interrupt her work. She had been 3 days out from the Osean homeworld, where the compact's 34th member had been deliberating its accession for 2 months. She did not live to receive their confirmation. Her first officer transmitted the report to the Atacama facility and then spent 4 hours figuring out how to write the other message, the one that explained why Priya would not be bringing the report home herself. Her daughter attended the dedication of the Exploration Center that Earth named after her 2 years later in Geneva. She stood in front of the building for a long time before she went inside. I stood nearby and watched her face do something complicated that I recognized from having watched Owen Grant's granddaughter stand in front of a memorial in a different city, and I understood that there is a specific expression that comes to the children of people who spent their lives building something invisible. When they finally see the shape of what their parent built, it is not simple pride. It is the specific recognition of a person understanding, perhaps for the first time, that the thing their parent was always distracted by, always tired from, always slightly absent because of. That thing was real, and it was large, and it mattered, and the distraction and the tiredness and the absence were not failures of love, but evidence of it, expressed in the only direction that person knew how to express it. On day 15 after the amendment's ratification, I boarded the Earth diplomatic courier vessel Meridian at 0600 Earth Standard Time and transmitted our flight plan to Theta Prime Station's docking authority. The flight plan was routine. We were listed as returning from a standard diplomatic consultancy review, the kind of administrative task that generated no particular interest from the Council's traffic monitoring systems, which were thorough, but which had been designed to flag anomalies, and nothing about our departure was anomalous. Except for the 14 vessels that departed Earth's orbital dock within the same 6-hour window on the same general heading, all of them listed under routine administrative and commercial categories, and all of them carrying members of Project Vanguard's legal team, diplomatic staff, and witness archive representatives. And except for the 32 compact member civilizations who had, in the 72 hours preceding our departure, each transmitted a formal communication to the Galactic Council's Diplomatic Registry Office, through their own independent communication systems, on their own frequencies, in their own languages, notifying the Council of the existence of the Compact of Open Skies and requesting formal recognition under the Council's Interspecies Relations Framework. The Council's Diplomatic Registry Office received 32 simultaneous notifications from 32 civilizations it had never heard of, in 32 languages its translation systems had never encountered, from 32 locations that were not on any chart in its archives. I was told later that the registry office's senior administrator, a Vithrani career official, named something that translated as the voice that processes incoming, spent approximately 40 minutes staring at her screen before she filed an emergency notification to the Founding Five's Joint Intelligence Committee. The Joint Intelligence Committee convened within 2 hours. I know what was said because one of the committee members was a Lithuanian representative who had, over the preceding 3 years, developed what I can only describe as a conscience. The specific kind that manifests in an intelligence official when they realize that the information they have been collecting has been consistently used to suppress things that did not deserve to be suppressed. The committee's first question was, what were these civilizations? The intelligence service's answer was, we don't know. They are not in our records. They are operating in space we have not chartered. Their technology levels vary from pre-space flight to approximately 60% of Council standard. We have no prior contact reports. We have no strategic assessments. We have no information of any kind. The committee's second question was, how many of them are there? The answer was, 32 confirmed. Possibly more. We don't know what we don't know. The committee's third question was, what do they want? The answer was, they want recognition of an existing compact with Earth, a compact that predates our amendment by 9 years. There was a silence in the committee session that the Lithuanian representative later described to me as the longest silence they had ever experienced in a professional setting, not because nothing was being said, because everyone in the room was doing the same calculation simultaneously and arriving at the same answer. The Council's amendment had stripped humanity of first contact rights in Council-adjacent space. Humanity had apparently been conducting first contacts outside Council-adjacent space for 41 years, and the civilizations they had contacted, who had never been subject to Council jurisdiction and who had therefore never been told they were supposed to find it inevitable, had organized themselves into a compact that covered an area 11 times the size of everything the Council had ever charted. The Lithuanian committee member, a senior intelligence official whose secondary feeding tendrils, according to the Lithuanian representative's account, were fully extended within 30 seconds of the translation finishing, said, how long have they been doing this? The intelligence director said, based on the compact's registration date, at least 41 years. We believe the first contact event occurred in 2079. Another silence. In 2079, the Lithuanian official said slowly, we were reviewing their application for junior membership status. Yes, the intelligence director said, while they were already making first contact with civilizations we didn't know existed. Apparently, yes. The Lithuanian official said nothing for a very long time. Then he said something that the translation system rendered as, we categorized them as a minor species with limited strategic relevance. The intelligence director said, yes. The Grand Conclave Chamber was different the second time I entered it as a presenting delegate. I had attended hundreds of sessions as an observer and 11 years of sessions as a junior committee representative. I had never stood at the center podium. I had never had reason to. Earth's voice on the Interspecies Integration Committee had been advisory at best and ignored at worst, and the center podium was for species whose voices were neither. I walked to it anyway. The chamber was full, not only of the Council's existing 412 member species, but of 32 additional delegations seated in the temporary gallery that Council staff had constructed in the 3 days between the compact's notification reaching the registry office and this session. 32 delegations representing civilizations that had never attended a Council session before. Some of them had traveled distances that required 3 weeks of continuous transit. Some of them were present via communication relay because the distances involved made physical presence impossible in the available time. All of them were here because Priya Chandrasekaran had spent 21 years visiting their worlds and sitting with their leaders and listening to their languages before she said a single word about what she wanted in return. They were here because they trusted humanity. I placed my data case on the lectern. I looked out at the chamber. Councillor Vayet, the Lithuanian presiding officer who had occupied her position for longer than most species' living memory, and whose impartiality was the only thing about the Council's procedures that I had never found reason to question, opened the session. Earth's diplomatic representative has requested a formal address to the full Council, she said, regarding the Compact of Open Skies and its implications for the Council's recent amendment to First Contact Protocols. Representative Adeyemi, you have the floor. Thank you, Counselor. I said. I did not activate a presentation. I did not display documents. I had considered it and decided against it because the thing I was about to say did not require supporting materials. It was a simple statement of fact, and simple statements of fact are best delivered simply. 32 civilizations, I said, representing a combined population of approximately 4.1 trillion sentient beings, have requested formal recognition under the Council's Interspecies Relations Framework. They have submitted that request independently, voluntarily, and through their own communication systems, in full knowledge of what the Council is and what membership in it entails. They have been briefed on the Council's governance structure, its treaty obligations, its member rights and member obligations, by human diplomatic staff who have spent an average of 14 months with each civilization before discussing the question of Council membership at all. I paused. Each of these 32 civilizations entered their relationship with Earth through a contact process that they did not experience as coercive. Each of them was told, in their first formal exchange with a human vessel, that they had the right to refuse contact, to end contact, and to determine the terms of any ongoing relationship at any time. Each of them exercised that right actively over months and years of interaction before choosing to accede to the compact, and each of them has now chosen, independently, to seek a relationship with this Council. I looked at the Vethrani delegations section of the chamber. Velthrix was sitting very still. His feeding tendrils were not visible. He was controlling them deliberately, which told me that the effort required to control them was significant. The Compact of Open Skies is not a challenge to this Council's authority, I said. It is a pre-existing treaty framework operating in space outside Council jurisdiction, built under legal principles that the Council's own founding members ratified and cannot revoke. It has been in operation for 9 years. It predates your amendment by 9 years. It will continue to operate whether or not this Council chooses to recognize it. I let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. What I am asking this Council to do today is not complicated. I am asking you to recognize 32 civilizations that wish to join your membership. I am asking you to acknowledge the Compact of Open Skies as a legitimate pre-existing treaty framework under interspecies relations law. And I am asking you to review the amendment passed 14 days ago in light of the fact that the strategic premise on which it was based, the premise that first contact rights in Council-adjacent space represent the full scope of meaningful first contact activity, has been demonstrated to be incorrect. I closed my data case. Earth does not require the Council's permission to continue its exploration program, I said. We are operating outside your jurisdiction, and we will continue to do so. What we are offering you today is the opportunity to engage with what we have built, rather than to pretend it does not exist. 32 civilizations are waiting for your answer. They have been patient. They have traveled very far. I would ask that you not make them wait longer than necessary. I walked back to Earth's delegation table and sat down. The chamber was quiet for a long time. Then Velthrix stood. He did not request recognition from Councillor Vayet, which was a procedural violation that Councillor Vayet noted and declined to enforce, which told me something about how she assessed the moment. Representative Adeyemi, he said. His translator bead was active. His voice was controlled in the specific way of someone who has made a decision to be controlled, because the alternative is visible, and he will not give me the satisfaction of seeing it. The Council will require time to review the Compact's legal documentation. Of course, I said, we have provided complete documentation packages to every member species diplomatic office. Our legal team is available for consultation beginning immediately. The 32 civilizations requesting membership will require individual assessment under standard integration protocols. We anticipated that, I said. We have provided cultural briefing materials, linguistic frameworks, and preliminary diplomatic profiles for each civilization to the Integration Committee's administrative office. The materials were prepared by the same team that conducted the original contacts and have been reviewed for accuracy by each civilization's own diplomatic representatives. Velthrix looked at me for a long moment. "You prepared integration materials," he said. "We've had 9 years," I said. "We wanted to make the committee's work as straightforward as possible." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a very large room full of very different species all arrive at the same understanding simultaneously. Not a comfortable silence, not an uncomfortable one. The silence of a calculation completing. Councillor Vayet called the vote on provisional recognition of the 32 civilizations at 1640 station time. The vote passed by 389 to 23. The Vethrani delegation was among the 389. Velthrix voted yes. I watched him do it, and I thought about Priya Chandrasekaran, spending 11 months with the Thurvani and learning the shape of their signals before she introduced herself. And I thought that she would have found this moment neither satisfying nor surprising. She would have found it simply correct. The way things should have gone from the beginning. She would have written it up in her field notes with the same precise, unhurried language she used for everything, and she would have moved on to the next system on her chart. The vote on the amendment review passed by 301 to 111. The review process would take 2 years. In the corridor afterward, Velthrix found me alone near the junction to the docking bays. His translator bead was active. He said, "The 34 civilizations, why did you not inform the council they existed?" I considered the question carefully. "We weren't sure," I said, "that the council would let them choose." He was quiet for a moment. His feeding tendrils moved slightly and then stilled. "They chose to join," he said. "They did," I said, "after 9 years of relationship with Earth during which they were told, repeatedly, that joining the council was optional." He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on a Vethrani face before. It was not anger and it was not fear. It was something more uncomfortable than either. It was the expression of a species confronting the specific gap between what they assumed they were offering and what they were actually offering, measured against what someone else had offered instead. "The exploration program," he said. "It continues?" "Yes," I said. "How far does it extend?" I looked at him for a long moment. "We've been doing this for 41 years, I said. "We cover a lot of ground." I left him standing in the corridor. "I have a house on a hillside above Chennai now, which is where my mother's family has been for 4 generations, and which is where I had always meant to return when there was nothing more urgent to do elsewhere. It took me longer than I expected to reach a point where nothing felt more urgent. I am not sure I have fully reached it. I still read Amaka's weekly briefings. I still attend 4 meetings a year by relay from my study, looking out at the Bay of Bengal and listening to reports about systems that are not on any council chart. There are 34 member civilizations in the Compact of Open Skies. There are now also 34 new council member species, all of them having completed the integration process over the 3 years following the session. The integration process, for the first time in council history, was conducted jointly. The Integration Committee's standard framework applied alongside the Compact's own onboarding protocols, with human diplomatic staff present throughout to serve as cultural intermediaries. The process took longer than the standard timeline. It was also, by every measure the committee used, more successful. None of the 34 new members entered the council indebted. None of them arrived without a pre-existing alliance. None of them had been told that joining was inevitable. Councillor Veye told me privately, in the year before she retired after 147 years in her position, that the 34 new members had changed the council's internal culture in a way that she had not expected, and that she found, on balance, encouraging. They asked questions in session that the existing members had stopped asking, because they had been in the room long enough to assume the answers were settled. They challenged procedural precedents, not out of ignorance, but because they had never been told those precedents were beyond challenge. They formed alliances with junior members and minor collectives that cut across the standard factional lines that the Founding Five had spent generations cultivating. The amendment was revised 18 months after the session. The revision did not restore Earth's first contact rights in Council-adjacent space. That fight is ongoing, and I have been reliably informed by Earth's current diplomatic team that they expect to win it within 3 years. What the revision did was remove the penalty classification of human-initiated contact as an act of interspecies aggression, which had been the amendment's most dangerous provision. Velthrix voted for the revision. I was told his feeding tendrils were retracted throughout the vote, which is the Vethrani equivalent of sitting perfectly still. Priya Chandrasekaran's name is in the archive at the Exploration Center in Geneva. Her section is extensive. It includes her original framework paper, all 34 contact reports, her field journals, which are extraordinary documents, precise and curious, and full of a quality of attention that I can only describe as genuine, and a recording of the first formal exchange with the Thirvani, which has since been heard by approximately 400 million people on Earth, and which begins with the Thirvani elder saying, "You waited. Most things that come from the sky do not wait." Her daughter visited the center on the first anniversary of its naming and spent 3 hours in the archive room. I was not there. I heard about it from Amaka, who was. Amaka said she sat with the Thirvani recording for a long time, that she played it twice, that she didn't say anything for a while after, and then she said she used to listen to radio transmissions in the evenings when I was small. I thought she was doing it for work. I didn't know she was learning to wait. My neighbor's son is 9 years old. His name is Arjun, and he has the particular quality of attention that some children have, the kind that makes them stop in the middle of doing something completely unrelated to ask a question they've been sitting with for days. He appeared at my gate last month while I was reading in the garden and asked without preamble, "Is it true that you went to space and met aliens?" "Yes," I said. "How many?" I thought about that. Counting all the species at the council sessions, several hundred. Counting the ones Earth met first, 34. He processed this. Did they know about us first, or did we know about them first? "We found them," I said. But they had been there the whole time. He thought about this with the expression of someone encountering a perspective they hadn't previously considered. "So they were always there," he said. "We just didn't know." "Yes," I said. "That's a lot of things to not know about." "It is," I agreed. He considered this for another moment. Then, "Are there more?" I looked at the sky above Chennai, which was blue and deep, and full of things that the Galactic Council had never bothered to look for, and that Project Vanguard's exploration fleet was, at this exact moment, in the process of finding. "Yes, Arjun," I said. "There are more." He looked satisfied with this in the way that 9-year-olds are satisfied with answers that confirm the world is larger than they thought. He went back to whatever he had been doing. I went back to my book. And above us, in the blue that deepens to black, and then to the specific endless dark, where things wait to be found by whoever bothers to look, 34 civilizations that had been told from their very first exchange with humanity that they had the right to say no were doing what civilizations do when they feel genuinely safe for the first time. They were expanding. And somewhere beyond the edge of everything the Galactic Council had ever mapped, in star systems that did not appear on any chart in any archive on Theta Prime Station, the threshold successor vessels were sailing on in the patient, unhurried way of ships crewed by people who understood that the point of the journey was not to arrive before anyone else. It was to arrive in a way that the people you found were glad you came.